You've mentioned Soros's Alchemy of Finance, and that you recently looked at it again. And how do you relate the work that you've created in this book to the perspective that George rendered in Alchemy of Finance?
Well, I think we use different terms, but we're really talking about the same thing. That is, his key idea, reflexivity, is the idea that because in social science and in any social activity, you don't know the answers. You have to make guesses. You have to find out about them. So human beings have, in my terms, to tell a story about what's happening. And I think reflexivity and telling stories are much the same thing. His idea is that you tell a story to yourself, I think, about what's going to happen, and then you behave in line with that story. If other people also are telling the same story and they behave in line with that story, then the story proves self-fulfilling. But that then eventually, since nobody knows, if you take your pendulum example, where it's going to stop, soon the prices may meet an inflection point and move back. But you never know. So in my view, what his idea is, and the idea of narrative, is really to make it clear that whilst we can do lots of rational things, we can do lots of things with computers and calculations to work out all the things that might be affecting the price of securities, all the time actually, because of uncertainty and because of information ambiguity, we never really know. And the only way we can manage that is telling a story. Now, the fundamental point here is that stories can change much quicker than underlying economic fundamentals. Actually, if you look at what's been happening this past summer, the market's been going all over the place for all kinds of things, even for copper and things like that. And that's because the story's shifting much quicker. Now, when people look at this from the moon, or in 50 years' time, they'll see that not very much was happening. Just a few percentage points here and there, which of course are very serious if you're one of the unemployed or whatever. But actually the stories produce much bigger changes.
Let's talk a little bit about context when story change can be enormously powerful in asset prices. We go to Frank Knight's version of fundamental uncertainty. Keynes or Hayek also had similar observations in that period. That was during the onset of World War I into the Great Depression, a period of tremendous structural flux. Right. It appears to me right now, if you look at the gold market or other commodities markets, and all these stories about the changing of the guard to Chinese leadership, that we're in a comparable period of structural flux, so that 1,000 flowers can bloom in terms of stories and hypotheses around the anxiety of not knowing what it looks like in the fog.
Exactly, and I think this is accentuated at the moment because we went through a period where financial markets were relatively stable, made huge profits for everyone, and everyone was happy if portfolios went up, and people got used to the idea that financial markets could grow really faster than underlying economies. Underlying economies were also growing quite fast in emerging countries and so on. And I think now we've got this big problem of adjusting back to reality, which of course, on the whole, if reality means you've got to get smaller or got to have less profits and so on, it's much more difficult for everyone to accept. And I don't just mean finance, big finance companies, but also ordinary people. So I think we've got, what's often talked about, there's the paying off of debt that's going on at the moment from what happened leading up to 2008. But there's also a psychological alteration, which is being, I think, resisted, and people are finding very difficult. So they're constantly still going for what I call in the book fantastic objects. That is, what is it going to be? Is it going to be gold? Is it going to be copper? Is it going to be new energy? Is it going to be... We don't know what it's going to be except for this. We know it's going to be something new. We know it's going to be something that makes us excited. We know it's going to be something that has potential, and we know it's going to be something we don't really understand.
Something you can't disprove. That's what bubbles are made of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for example, Amazon, was a bubble at one time, but of course it's a fantastically successful company. Right. But a lot of the other ones aren't. And so there's always, I think, some truth to a story in order to try to prevent bubbles getting out of control. Once they've started, it's bad news. You've got to try and prevent them getting too much out of hand. Well, the key thing is to get people anxious about what they're doing. And as I see it for the future, the central banks need to take seriously the idea that asset prices are in fact created by stories, and they need to engage with trying to understand that process much better, and also understand how they can communicate to the community, to the pension funds, to everyone, that at the moment, it's red light time. These stories, they're looking very dodgy, and I think we're going to need to think about new ways of communicating economic advice to people. Just changing the interest rate clearly is insufficient. In any case, it's being used for other things. But we may need to create stories, and I don't mean false stories, but actually by using forensic analysis, using agents around the country doing real analysis of what do these new kind of companies do, which will help people to get anxious.